It has now been 10 years since the release of Sicario, directed by Denis Villeneuve. And since that time, much has happened in the careers of the artistic geniuses involved. Denis has been given the keys to Bond, Roger Deakins won 2 Academy Awards, NBC Universal gave Taylor Sheridan $1 billion, and Josh Brolin was Thanos, so it's been a pretty good run. The 10-year anniversary is reason enough to remember this collaboration of masters, but certain events are transpiring that make Sicario more relevant than ever. Taylor Sheridan imagined CIA operations in the shadows. As Michael Weston says about the bloody border shootout, it won't even make the newspapers in El Paso. The situation in our world today is a bit different. Instead of knives in Mexican drug tunnels, we have super carriers in the Caribbean. But though the tools in use are different, the main question of Sicario is relevant to not just these two conflicts, one real, one imaginary, but to all instances of warfare. In order to reach that question and identify potential answers, we need to look back at the three main characters of the story: Kate, Matt, and the Sicario himself, Alejandro.
Do we get an opportunity of the men responsible for today?
The men who are really responsible for today, yeah.
Sicario does not begin with Matt Graver. We do not experience the story through his eyes, but he stands separate from the other members of the Trinity. Personality-wise, he's outgoing, eccentric, a jokester. He's certain of himself and the task he's been assigned to. Kate and Alejandro have more reserved personalities, and they have internal conflicts as they participate in Matt's external one. Matt is a career soldier with an uncomplicated view of the mission at hand. Like a disease, cartel violence is crossing the border and harming American communities. So he and his men must be like the Spartans at Thermopylae: plug the gap, buy time, and restore a degree of order. His fighting mentality is straightforward. You do what you have to do to complete the objective, end of story. Nothing happens in Sicario that takes Matt off guard. Doesn't matter what the mission is, where it is, who's the enemy. Matt only knows one thing: he needs to succeed. And even though Matt is presented as a nefarious force at times, namely at the end, I think he represents the mainstream view of how these things work. When push comes to shove, certain rules and laws must be broken to protect your society if the enemy is using those moral boundaries as a shield to protect themselves. But when those lines are crossed, they must be crossed as dispassionately as possible. The objective is not forging new standards of morality. You do only what is necessary to restore order, and then turn on the safety once again. What rules to break and for what threat level is an impossible question, and decisions will be made on a case-by-case basis. But through the stories of Kate and Alejandro, we find some guidance.
Is there anything I should know?
You're asking me how watch works. For now, let's just keep an eye on the time.
It does not take long for Kate to realize she's a fish out of water. The Delta guys and Matt view her as a nuisance and too weak to effectively fight the cartels. Alejandro holds a different perspective. He knows that she isn't weak. The same fire that drove him to become a prosecutor in Juarez burns inside Kate. She is a passionate idealist who believes that lawfare and due process is the right path to maintain order, and she will fight as fiercely as anyone against those who harm the innocent, as long as the fight is within established boundaries. Alejandro shows a gentleness and care for Kate because of this connection. She reminds him of the man he was before his family was murdered. So a part of Alejandro sympathizes with her idealism, and another wants to snuff it out. This divide is best shown at the very end. A warm touch of comfort is followed by cold metal. Kate's story, which ends with Alejandro reaching out of the darkness to threaten her life, begins with her sitting in a similar position. As she waits with the rest of her team in an APC, a very harsh light enters from the windows, foreshadowing the moral dilemma she'll confront in the world of Matt and Alejandro. There are moments in Sicario where Kate appears ready to allow darkness some leeway. She sees cartel brutality firsthand, and the visit to Juarez only heightens her desire for justice. But she never abandons her belief that justice means prosecution, not execution, for drug lords and their underlings who may have a more complicated reason for being involved in trafficking. As the credits roll, we are left with the image of a young boy destined to grow up in a hyper-violent society without money and without a father, an unintended consequence of the mission. And it's with this image that the questions are posed. Who was right? What principles lead to the best, most peaceful future? And what should societies be willing to sacrifice for protection? I think Alejandro represents a line that should not be crossed. On an emotional level, you understand why he does what he does. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You killed my wife and child, I'm here to return the favor. But by doing this, he becomes what he once wanted to stand against. That's the principle he embodies through his revenge. If you're as brutal as your enemy, they'll fear you. And fear is much quicker than a judicial process. There are echoes of come and see here. At what point do you stop pulling the trigger? When do you become as bad as the people you hate? Kate doesn't shoot Alejandro because of this idea. He shot her, he threatened her life. Why not take revenge herself? She doesn't lower the weapon out of weakness. It's out of pity for what he's lost and what he's become. We live in an imperfect fallen world, and war is never going away as much as we wish it would. As the judge says in Blood Meridian, it makes no difference what men think of war. War endures. As well ask men what they think of stone. It goes without saying, but all diplomatic efforts should be made to prevent armed conflict. But if peace efforts fail, and the wolf is trying to blow your house down, how do you respond? To protect your society from wolves, you can't be afraid of the dark, to use Alejandro's words. But you can't give yourself up to it. In Sicario, giving up to it means becoming like Alejandro. Make it known that there's no level of cruelty that you won't match. But there's a space between primal vengeance and rigid moral boundaries that your enemies will exploit. Even in that space, there are no easy choices. If anything, Sicario is a demonstration of how hard these choices are for people in a position to make them. But it's very important to discuss in a mature way when it's okay to say the ends justify the means. We all know how dangerous those words can be, but it can also be dangerous to say no ends justify these means. I remember after the 2024 terrorist attack in Moscow, which was just a horrific event. I saw the footage, I wish I hadn't. But when the Russians caught the alleged perpetrators, they tortured all of them. One of them had their ear cut off, one of them was dragged into court, basically comatose. And the reaction on social media from a lot of people was, good. I wish the West did this to mass shooters and terrorists. No trial, no due process. You need to strike fear into potential copycats. And when you remember the footage of what happened, it's a very human reaction to nod along with that sentiment. But you need to take a step back and think, what would the true consequences be if that were normalized? Because we feel more than we think. We crave revenge when we see acts of evil like that. There's always going to be a battle between the side of us that wants immediate payback and the side that thinks more long term. And that's why I love Sicario. I've seen it many times, and Kate can kind of drive you crazy. You want Matt and Alejandro to kick ass and do their thing. But the more I think about Kate's position, the more I understand the long-term consequences she's afraid of. My opinion on her as a character has shifted a number of times. But as the war on drugs enters a new chapter, I hope more people watch Sicario and think about her story, so the conversations the movie wanted to start 10 years ago are reignited.